The rain slammed the pavement as Officer Collins confronted a man in the storm. But when the stranger's eyes met his, and his hand revealed a badge from Collins's own department, the world seemed to stop. What happened next will shatter everything you thought you knew. But let's rewind and start from the beginning. It was a rainy evening, the kind that soaked everything and made the streets shimmer with a cold, ghostly light. Officer Ryan Collins was wrapping up his shift, the night unusually quiet. His headlights cut through the downpour, but something caught his eye. A figure standing alone on the side of the road. A tall black man, his hoodie pulled low, walking with a purpose that still felt aimless, as if he wasn't going anywhere in particular. Without hesitation, Collins slowed the patrol car and pulled over. The quiet nights always felt like an opportunity for something more. He stepped out, his boots hitting the wet pavement with a sharp click. "Hey, you!" Collins shouted, his voice breaking through the steady rhythm of rain. "What are you doing out here?" The man didn't flinch. He turned, his gaze steady, distant, yet unbothered by the officer's presence. There was no immediate response. Marcus Thomas, his name would become relevant later, didn't stop, just glanced at Collins before continuing his walk. Annoyance flickered across Collins's face. The silence stretched too long. To him, the man was avoiding him, walking with intent, but not engaging. "I said stop!" Collins's voice hardened as he took a step closer. Marcus paused, but didn't stop. His eyes, calm but unyielding, met Collins's. "I'm just walking," he said, his tone even, almost patient. Collins's lips twisted into a sneer. "Walking? At this hour? You're up to no good. I'm gonna need to check you." The words hung in the air, tension thickening as Marcus's chest tightened. But his response wasn't fear. It was something darker. He had been preparing for this. Weeks of careful planning, evidence, and a case against Collins that had been quietly taking shape. And now, here they were, face to face. Marcus had never thought this moment would come like this. But there was no turning back now. Collins didn't register the subtle shift in Marcus's posture, the slight tightening of his shoulders, the way his jaw set just a little firmer. All he saw was a black man alone on the street, a figure that fit the well-worn stereotype Collins had carried with him for years. His hand shot out, grasping Marcus's arm without a second thought, expecting compliance. The moment his fingers made contact, the air around them seemed to snap. Tension crackled like static. Marcus's eyes locked onto his, sharp and unwavering. There was no fear, no resistance, only a cold, unsettling focus that caused Collins to pause, just for an instant. Something flickered in Marcus's gaze that made the officer falter. "Don't touch me." Marcus's voice was quiet, but it held an edge, a warning. The words hit Collins like a challenge. His irritation flared. "Who the hell do you think you're talking to?" he spat, his voice rising with frustration. "I said, turn around." But Marcus wasn't some random suspect. He wasn't the kind of man to be intimidated or easily pushed aside. He was a prosecutor, an officer of the law, just like Collins. And in this moment, Marcus was looking straight at the face of corruption, staring at the very man he had spent weeks preparing to expose. Collins's pulse quickened. His grip tightened instinctively, but something about the way Marcus stood, unmoving and tense, made him uneasy. His breath hitched slightly. This wasn't just another routine stop. "I'm gonna ask you again," Collins growled, his voice strained with impatience. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Marcus paused, his eyes never leaving Collins's. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his badge. "I'm an assistant district attorney," he said, the words cold, final. The realization hit like a hammer. The officer's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a man to intimidate. This was a man with power and a target. The rain fell harder now, the downpour blurring the world around them. The sound of it hitting the pavement was deafening, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Officer Collins stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the badge in Marcus's hand. Disbelief painted his face, the words struggling to break free from his throat. "Wait, you're—" Collins stammered, his voice trailing off as the weight of the moment sank in. This wasn't the confrontation he'd been expecting. He had prepared himself for an argument, a struggle, but not this. Not for his world to shift in an instant. For one heartbeat, everything paused. The roles had reversed. He wasn't the one in control anymore. Marcus wasn't the one being questioned. Marcus stepped closer, his movements deliberate, and the intensity of his gaze never wavered. "I'm investigating you, Collins," he said, his voice cold, cutting through the thick silence of the night. "You've been under review for a while now." Collins's gaze dropped, his eyes darting to the ground, and his hand reflexively moved toward his belt, fingers brushing the handle of his gun. A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't expected this. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice shaking, though he tried to hide it. Marcus's lips curled into a tight, knowing smile. He didn't need to say more. "I've been building a case against you," he said quietly, each word weighted with certainty. "The corruption, the abuse of power, the things you've done to people like me. I've got it all." Collins's heart skipped a beat. The realization hit him hard, faster than the rain. What had started as a routine stop was now the breaking point, the moment his world began to crumble. His mind raced through a dozen faces, people he had wronged, lives he had ruined, and he could feel them closing in on him. This wasn't just about one bad decision. This was his reckoning. Marcus stood tall, his hand gripping the badge like a weapon, the metal gleaming under the harsh glow of the streetlights. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable force that seemed to press against both men. Collins's chest tightened as the realization hit him. Everything he thought he controlled was slipping away. His anger flared, but it wasn't directed at Marcus. It was a self-loathing fury, a desperate gnawing rage at his own arrogance. For years, he had convinced himself that he was untouchable, that the system would shield him. But now, standing in front of this man, everything he'd built, every lie, every abuse of power, was unraveling. "You're too late," Collins spat, his voice sharp, trembling with defiance. "You think they'll believe you over me? I'm untouchable. I have friends in high places." Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes, calm and steady, locked onto Collins, and his voice was firm, devoid of fear. "It's already in motion. You're done." The words hit Collins like a slap to the face, but it was the sound that followed that shook him to the core. The distant wail of sirens. Slowly, the realization crept in. Backup was coming. Marcus had already set everything in motion. The wheels of justice were grinding, and Collins could feel them closing in around him. Without a word, Marcus turned and walked toward his car. His movements were deliberate, purposeful. He had done what he came for. The justice that had long eluded him, and countless others, was finally on its way. Collins stood frozen, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of disbelief and anger. The sirens grew louder, closer. His hands trembled as he realized that he wasn't the one in control anymore. Soon, officers would arrive to arrest him, to charge him with everything he thought he could escape. The weight of his actions, the consequences he had long ignored, was finally catching up to him.